Hello and welcome to episode 14 of our Walk in My Shoes series, where we are discussing how we can inspire more and encourage better philanthropy and social investment for the wealthy in our society. Despite the increase in economic inequality over the past years, with the disparity in wealth growing across the globe, the donations by ultra and high net worth individuals over this period has remained static, and research shows that 90% of the wealthy don't give in any meaningful way. Today, we want to explore why wealthy individuals get involved with philanthropy and social investment, the role of advisors in encouraging wealthy people to give strategically and with impact, and what it is that's stopping them. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our chair for today, our board member Jo Bateson, who's a partner at KPMG UK. And joining Jo for this discussion, I welcome Theresa Lloyd, philanthropy advisor and author, and John Nickson, the co-founder of Our Common Good. As always, I ask that you remain respectful to the discussion, the panel and each other. Please use the chat to introduce yourselves and to ask questions, and we will try to answer them all. But do please come and join us after the discussion on LinkedIn for any questions we don't get to. The link will be posted in the chat. Thanks to you all for joining and for the panel for giving their time today. And now I will pass over to you, Jo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and thank you everyone for joining. And as you said, Jo, feel free to put questions in the chat if you so want to. So our focus today is to talk about how can we achieve more and better from ultra high net wealth individuals in terms of philanthropy. So I'm going to take that into three sort of sections really. So we'll start with the more, and then we'll move on to the better, and then maybe the role of professional advisors in sort of achieving both more and better. So John, if I can start with you, I know you've written a couple of books, so I was going to pick on one of them. So in your book, Giving is Good for You, you talk about how a small proportion of wealthy people give generously. Why do you think that is?
It's not in the culture. We haven't been brought up to do it. It's not visible. The media isn't interested, and it's not a political priority. How's that for a start?
I like the culture point is definitely an interesting one. I know one of the other talks was about comparing the US and the UK culture. Why do you think then that sort of median number that we quote around, you know, the 4,000 that people give, why do you think that's so low?
Well, partly for the reasons that that I've given. There's an even worse statistic, I think, that Kath Dovey and the Scorpio Partnership have come up with, is that only 5% of the wealthiest 1% give more than 0.2% of their wealth each year. You know, I think it's not only a disgrace. I think it's a scandal. And the reason I wrote that book, Giving is Good for You, because the philanthropists with whom I'd worked with over 25-year career were fed up with the same old names appearing on the lists. There is no way to really pressure people. The only way this is going to change is by encouraging, the best way of persuading people is to follow others' example. So we need really more visibility. It's going to be slow. I mean, the other thing that we should do, and that's going to take 20, 25 years, is we should be teaching in schools how to be a good citizen. Okay. And being a good citizen is about giving, of your time. Money is not necessarily the important thing, but your commitment to society. And I don't think many of it, I had a very privileged upbringing from independently wealthy kind of stuff. And there was absolutely nothing in our upbringing about giving back. So it's an uphill battle, but we're going to win it.
I like your positivity. I mean, Theresa, it'd just be useful for your kind of views on those sort of questions too, about, you know, why you think it is that such a small proportion gives so generously, and why you think that number is so low.
Well, I'm building on what John has said. I absolutely agree about the culture. And one of the issues in this country, which links to the States and other countries, is the declining observation of the sort of formal religion, in which, and one of the things that's come out of my research and my books, is that people from religious traditions, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, where there's a Quaker, of course, as used to be in this country, there's a concept may not always be called this, but of tithing or giving a proportion. And indeed, there is certain peer group pressure to give, and it's made quite clear to prominent members of the different communities what is expected of them. This has declined completely, and I think various research has been done in this country about the extent to which this was related. I mean, the feeling of the state will pay, which particularly after the war, very high tax rates on the wealth, and so on and so on. So that's sort of why it's happened. I do think, but there is also something about, John touched on the media, and I think that's really true from two angles. One is about celebrating those who do give, and often, not always, but often it's tinged with sort of resentment about the wealthy, questions about how the wealth was required. Just a couple of weeks ago, when the 80 million gift to Oxford University for a postgraduate college by the Reuben brothers, all sorts of questions about how the wealth was acquired and so on. And there's still a powerful lobby which argues that anyway it should all be the responsibility of the state. And on the positive side, I have tried completely unsuccessfully for 20 years or something to encourage the FT in its How to Spend It magazine to have a regular How to Give It. Not every now and then, they had a supplement in February, but absolutely regularly how to give effectively, to celebrate those who do, to report on good charities across the piece, those that have a real impact, and so on. So I think there are two aspects of the media that could help, shall we put it this way. As to why it's so small, frankly, I mean, this is a different area, but I think that one of the questions is that too often people give what they're asked, and they're not necessarily asked, because for not very highly paid person working for a charity to ask for £10,000 would seem extremely high, let alone the huge sums that potentially could be given. And I think people need to be asked by people they know and respect, who are themselves supporters. So I think one huge issue in what charities could do is to mobilize their trustees and existing donors to be ambassadors. Some do it extremely well, but not all, and I think that could help. It's particularly interesting. One of your previous earlier seminars indicated that there had been more giving to NHS charities recently, perhaps inspired by Captain Sir Tom's efforts. And what this is telling me is that for some people, and was telling the panelists then, is that for some donors at least, actually it is not a question of I haven't got enough. It's a question about being inspired. People give when they're inspired or outraged or in some way, yeah, inspired will do. And I think there's something about the fact that people some have been motivated to give much more when the need is so apparent, it's in their face.
Jo,
yes. Sorry, yes, of course.
I just come in to just add to something that Theresa said, that there is a tremendous responsibility on the behalf of the charity sector to be more effective. I'm not saying all charities are ineffective, absolutely not. But if this is going to grow, then there has to be much greater understanding within charities of the psychology and the motivation, etc., of people who want to give money. Because part of the reason, I know we're moving away from this tiny number of only 4,000 of the wealthy, but I think you might grow the number if charities were to become, let me put it this way, even better at making the case and making the whole of society actually understand the issues and how they reflect upon society as a whole.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And just on why people give, just to make a distinction, which is between having a propensity to give, being brought up in a culture of giving, feeling, if you like, philanthropic, and the sort of things that were outlined in the briefing notes, families who feel a responsibility, who want to put something back, who may use philanthropy as a way to inculcate values in their children, all of that. And that's, if you like, general. There's then, why would people give to a particular cause? And that is absolutely as John says, about charities understanding the mindset and motivation and why and how, and we might come on to this, people might want to be involved. What donors and potential donors might expect from the relationships with the organisations they support. The days of just signing a cheque and saying we wish you well and sending me a report once a year, if they ever existed, have long gone.
I think that moves on to the point around better, I suppose, and where philanthropy is today. So John, what sort of trends are you seeing really around philanthropy, how it's evolving over, well, I suppose up till now, but has COVID changed that? Or do you think that it was evolving and that's continuing to evolve?
COVID will change everything, and we're not quite sure, but we've just got to be prepared to be open-minded. It's not clear, but there's been evidence really for some years that philanthropy has been evolving in a way very successfully by focusing on key issues, but at a local level. Let me just very briefly give you one example of an astounding successful charity that has recruited, not only raised huge amounts of money, but has persuaded people to give who've never given before. Many people participating today may be aware of online youth zones. This was a charity initially set up in Bolton as a response to reduced youth services. And it's what was a youth club has been transformed into a state-of-the-art building, providing services to a membership of 7,000 or 8,000 young people, and transforming the quality of their lives so that their sports and cultural facilities are amazing, but also the support for kids who've been broken, who are seemingly unemployable or who have been chucked out of school, and professionals are putting these children together. This charity has now spread that from the north of England. There are 3 or 4 in London. But what makes it so interesting is it's a philanthropically led initiative by a local philanthropist who started this thing. And it's built on a basis where there is an equal partnership with the public sector, which is the local authority. And the local authority puts its money in on the terms of the charity. There's no question of the charity having to tick boxes to get public money. The local authority is either interested or it's not. Then the running costs, usually £1.5 million a year, are borne by local sponsors and donors. And that's what's been interested in every single youth zone that's been established. They have succeeded in persuading local people and local businesses who have never, ever given anything more to support this. At the same time, the founders of the charity managed to get a one-on-one conversation with George Osborne when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. And the result was announced, I think, either just before or just after the last general election, that the government has put in £500 million of capital to enable more youth zones to be established. Now, that is a philanthropically led initiative that has grown, it's become a national charity, and is doing fantastic work.
Okay. Yes, Theresa, yeah.
It was just, that's a fantastic.
That's a fantastic story, yeah.
Congratulations to all. Just to add, and reinforces the point I was going to make about trends, your question. I know the rich list has a sort of a take which we can all discuss, although not now, on philanthropy and wealth and so on. But one of the trends it identified was people giving to higher education for the purposes of access by the disadvantaged young people and so on, bursaries, scholarships and so on. And I think this has been a trend for some time, and we see it in the arts as well. Donations not necessarily to finance glitzy productions, wonderful though they may be, but to finance access both to training and to attending performances by people generally young, but mainly young, who wouldn't otherwise be able to go. And I see this as part of a growing trend. So that is, in some senses, like John's story, sort of encouraging that people, some people at least, realizing the need for a sort of cohesion in society, and if that such people are totally alienated, they don't get the support described so brilliantly in the youth zones and so on, and they don't get access to, and there are similar things about access to sport, then people will become completely disaffected. So, there will be a disintegration and so on. Because one of the trends I would be concerned about, I have no evidence yet for this, is that because older people, who tend to be not only, but a backbone of volunteers, may be slightly warier in the near future, then I think that's a risk. And the other risk, perhaps we were going to come onto this differently, but is which I think may be a trend, is a negative aspect, is that people, even those whom we might regard as quite wealthy, will be feeling much less financially secure. And of course, trusts and foundations are seeing values of their endowments fall, interest rates, and allied to huge demand. And I think that's, jury's out, of course, on exactly how that will play out. But I think that is a challenge.
Jo, I've spotted a question on here, yes, about philanthropists responding to the government's history of austerity, hard Brexit, etc., etc. How will they respond to being left to pick up the pieces? The answer is not at all well. A couple of years ago, I did see a letter which was sent to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. This is about the funding culture in the UK. And all the famous names were there. And what they said was, you must understand, government, that we are supporting the arts because you are. And you want them even more. Don't think that we will give more because we won't. So I hope that answers part of the question.
I would absolutely support that, and I think when I was on the board of an NHS trust, 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, which was raising significant sums of money for capital and research projects, it was absolutely crucial to be able to say the NHS is doing this, we're doing this. It's a partnership, particularly in this country. It is expected that the NHS will contribute, and that message was hugely important to unlock the major funding, that it's a partnership. And I actually have a view about how that idea of a partnership, well, in fact, as John has described for the Youth Zones project, I think that a future option, which you might want to come back to, Jo, so I'll leave it for now, but I do think this is a strong idea to develop what we might slightly dangerously call public-private partnerships.
Yes, well, there's a bit of a dangerous term, that. I mean, I think that there seems to be a lot in the sort of media about there might be lots of philanthropists who are looking to give significant amounts, maybe for the first time ever. So they might have been in this median group of 4,000 and they might be looking to give a more substantial donation. And obviously, both of you are philanthropists in your own right, but you've also kind of worked with families. What would you say, John, if you were advising somebody, and then we'll same question to you, Theresa, if you were advising someone who was for the first time wanting to make a significant donation, just thinking about how you would help them on that journey, I suppose, about how they were going to do it, what sort of advice would you give?
Well, to answer first, first of all, what motivates them and what causes are they interested in? But the big question we should all be asking of anything that we do in life is, what will be the impact of, what difference will it make? And I'm a relatively new donor myself. And just to be clear, I'm not pitching for funds here because I know that's not allowed, but I'm just going to describe a project that my new philanthropic charitable fund has started. And I think this is the way of the future. So my project partner and I chose a particular part of the country which we were familiar with, and we knew there were problems of social deprivation and educational inequality. And we said to the Community Foundation in Oxfordshire, what do you think are the real priorities in this wealthy county, but which there is significant poverty? And they worked out the 3 top things. And we chose to support educational inequality, by which we meant that young children from very challenged backgrounds were arriving at primary school 4 to 5 months behind their middle class peers. So we put in the money to do the research, to appoint a project leader to design it. And now here's the really, really important bit. It's not what we did. What the Community Foundation and the project director who we recruited and funded did was formed an alliance of 5 different charities working locally in Oxfordshire and persuaded them to help design the project and to work together. That also involved working with the NHS, the local office of Register of Births, and we brought in both Oxford University and Oxford Brookes University to do the research. So you see, we've designed a project with specific outcomes for a group of very, very young children. And our thinking behind this is, if it's a pilot, it's an experiment. If we can make this work, then other people, it can be replicated in other parts of the country. And at the same time, we're building the capacity of the charities who are involved. Now, speaking personally now, as a donor, I find this enormously rewarding. Why? Because we're making a difference to the lives of nearly 1,000 children.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything John has said. I mean, this is how would I advise potential new philanthropists, which indeed I do. I think precisely, do I really care about this issue? Is the organisation that I'm thinking about supporting, maybe has approached me, all of that, competent? Do they have an impact? Which I say, it's just, again, a 2-tier thing. Do I care about the cause? And while I absolutely, I think John's story is inspirational, there are, of course, in existence, 180,000 registered charities, a greater or less competent size, reach, all the rest of it. So I'm not at all discounting the underpinning importance of John's recommendation, if you like, or suggestions, which is about research. I mean, the fact is that the kind of people we're talking about, if they were being asked to consider investing, whether it's in a startup, as John has described, or an existing company, they would undertake their research, or they would ask their financial advisors to do so. They wouldn't just, they get an email saying, please invest in blogs, widgets, and so on. So I come back to my point about who is introducing this organization, who is telling you about it, who is saying, come and see the fantastic work that this organization, of which I'm a trustee, does. So I think it is, it is, if you like, irresponsibility for donors, if one can put it that way, to undertake research, as with any other investments. And then the corollary is the responsibility on the charities, and I'm going to use that term sort of across the piece, whether it's a university, a major art gallery, or a small embryonic organization. And I absolutely endorse the importance of community foundations. They can help with the admin. I mean, as advisors, they can organize a collaboration. They can, I mean, with other people who might sort of share the same interests. They can introduce local organizations in a particular sector. And I think starting local is very good advice, depending on, of course, where local is.
Yes, that's always fair. I mean, I think, John, for you, what role has sort of professional advisors had to sort of help you, either when you were as a philanthropist yourself, or as a kind of a fundraiser in your sort of earlier career? Do you think professional advisors have got a role to help, wealthy people do better and more in terms of philanthropy? Yes,
I mean, we need more of it. I got to know through the philanthropists I was dealing with, because I was working for national institutions. So those were the kind of major donors I was dealing with. So I'm aware of the work that they're doing. I think the potential for wealth advisors, and indeed lawyers, solicitors who are working for families, the potential is absolutely huge. I think it needs to expand. It's where I think it's probably more significant than anything else to have somebody who's advising you on how to manage your money, to plant the seed or to give you the option. There is another way of using your money. And I see there's a question down here about social investment, which I think is incredibly important. And that's, I think, becoming an increasingly attractive option to younger people who've made money, who might want to invest their capital and at some point get it back again, having registered quite an important social impact return.
I think that's right, social impact bonds and various variants. Just on philanthropy advisors,
yeah,
I completely agree with John. I have a slight caveat. Caveat is the wrong word. I think it's the question of the role of the advisor, but also, for want of a better word, their personality and so on. I think it is not coincidence that both John and I are philanthropists, obviously not ultra high net worth individuals, but have set up, in my case with my husband, a charitable trust which has given 10% of our income for nearly 30 years now. And actually having that hands-on experience, good and, it has to be said, occasionally not so good, of how the relationships are, of having a passion. Why would you give your money away? And that is understood not because you've read a book or heard people like John and me say, well, there are these reasons and this is the research, but because you know it from your heart and your experience and so on. I'm not saying, and I'm not saying giving a huge sum, but when I have done a tiny bit of work ages ago about whether advisors give. Many of them may earn, I mean, let us say even 50,000 a year. Well, do they give at all? If not, why not? Do they think it's important? Do they volunteer? Do they give any hours? And certainly, I have occasionally spoken to groups of philanthropy advisors who were surprised by the question. So this may be treading on very thin ice, but I do think that feeling that empathy, just as if you were a wealth manager and you were advising a client about investing in wine, you would send them to somebody who understood about wine. If you didn't have an in-house person. If you were somebody who was investing in contemporary art, you would find somebody who was a real expert, who shared that passion and knowledge. I think having that kind of shared passion helps. I'll put it no higher than that.
I have a question of Jo, if that's okay. She's been off 28 minutes. Jo, you're a professional advisor, and your firm has trained your professional advisors in helping their clients through their donor journey. Why did you do that?
Why did I do that? I mean, I suppose there's a question in the Q&A which sort of links to that. I mean, I think that to talk to clients about purpose, now bearing in mind KPMG, we don't offer the full services that that a philanthropist would need on their journey, but for us, why we did it is because I think it's important to talk to clients about the purpose of their wealth and to help them with that journey. And people find that quite a difficult conversation. I think, Theresa, you're right. Maybe it's because people don't give themselves, or they just don't feel like it's a topic. So Philanthropy Impact ran us some training on how to have those conversations. Some of it, to me, is a terminology thing. Some of the phrases that people use, so there's a confidence bit. And then for us, we have found it really improves our client relationships. It deepens our relationships with clients. We understand what clients want. For the purpose of wealth is such a core point for private clients. It's a real value add, and really helped our clients really along their journey.
Great, thank you. We're just about over, so thank you, Jo, John, and Theresa for this. It's been really fascinating. I find that we're starting a conversation, and this is going to add to it, about what kind of society we want. Because right now, we're getting potential of significant numbers. Some people have said up to 50% of the charities closing. Well, if that happens, what kind of society are we going to have? And so we're trying to get a conversation now, just not about reacting to COVID-19 and the current emergency, but what's going to happen after and how we're going to build. Because I think it was John, I think you said about how we could have potentially a really positive future and change the way we out. So it could be the new normal, or it could be back to the old normal. So we'll carry on that conversation. So thank you, all three of you. And I'd like to ask you one last favor. I'd like you to give me some words of wisdom in 30 seconds so the audience can go away highly inspired and motivated. Theresa.
I would just like to say that my first philanthropic gift in 2007, funding a scholarship for a young refugee from the Rwandan genocide, has transformed my life for the better beyond words.
Great. Okay, thank you. Theresa.
Well, I was going to say something very similar in a slightly different way. As my recent book was called Ritualize, and it's called that because there is no question that every single person I've interviewed over the years has said what John has said, that philanthropy has transformed their lives, hugely rewarding in all sorts of ways. So I would say to philanthropy advisors, who presumably are the majority of this audience, and picking up what Jo said, not to be afraid to raise the subject. You will be respected, I think, for showing that you have values which are beyond making as much money as possible and avoiding as much tax as possible. And so my message would be, go for it. And you will actually be helping your clients get real fun out of life. As many people observe, you very rarely meet an ex-philanthropist.
I think that's true. And then I suppose just for me, I always feel that I felt before I didn't have all the answers to clients in this sort of philanthropy journey, but actually that's part of the fun, is I'm building up my community of other philanthropists and other philanthropy advisors along the way. So don't feel like you can't start the conversation just because you're worried that you won't be able to finish it, because there's lots of people out there. There's a lot of expertise if you're open to collaborate, where you'll help find the answer.
So it's great. So you get a lot of fun out of it. You get an impact, and you do good. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much, all three of you. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sophia.
Yeah, again, I echo John. Thank you all for your time and for coming and sharing with us today. Thank you all for being here. We have an event coming up on racial inequity in philanthropy and social investment, and that's on the 2nd of July. We'd love you all to join us for that. Next week we are talking about, what is it we're talking about? I do this every time. I had it in my head 2 seconds ago. Well, yeah, so we've got a new, we have another, I'll see you next Monday, is what I'm saying. All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
On climate change.
Climate change, that's it.